Do you find it hard to explain to friends and family what you now do? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure out challenges on your own? We have created a community for ex-corporate people running their own business who want to live a life they love whilst giving back to their community. This is the Build, Live, Give show. We bring you first-hand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day. We get real with no corporate BS. And now your host, Paul Higgins.
Welcome to the Build, Live, Give show. I'm Paul Higgins and I'm your show host. And today I'm very excited to have Kelly Exeter from Swish Design. Kelly went in and told her boss that she would be an employee for life, that she never wanted to run her own business. And then in the space of 2 weeks, she'd actually resigned and started her own business. It's quite an amazing story that she tells. And then she also talks about the key struggles that she had with her business and her personal life, and then how her husband Anthony stepped in to actually write the business, and how now 11 years on, how successful it has been. She also gives some brilliant advice around why you should invest in a website, some advice that I haven't heard before, and it's really worth listening to. So she's very open in this podcast, and she's got a wonderful story and journey to tell. So why don't you get your pens and paper ready, and I'll now hand you over to Kelly Exeter from Swish Design. If you're enjoying listening to these journeys, just letting you know we have a community for ex-career people running profitable businesses just like you. It's called BLG Boost. You get exclusive access to a forum of like-minded peers answering your most pressing questions 24/7. You get specific action tips to solve your most common challenges. You get trusted suppliers to remove lost time. You also get access to member exclusive offers to save you money. You also get access to myself as a coach directly on a one-on-one basis. You get weekly videos from global experts. And finally, you get monthly webinars solving topics mentioned in popular threads. If you're tired of being alone and want to rapidly grow your dream business, go to buildlivegive.com/BLG Boost. This link is in the show notes. Please check it out. Okay, I will see you inside. Welcome, Kelly Exeter from Swish Design to the Build, Live, Give show. We're going to get to know a lot about you today, Kelly, but why don't you start with a bit of your backstory?
Okay. All right. So as you said, I'm from Swish Design. I started that business. Swish Design is a web and graphic design business, and I started that all the way back in 2006. And it was actually long before I intended to start a business. I'd actually had a conversation. I was working as a graphic designer at the time, and I'd had a conversation with one of my bosses about 2 weeks earlier saying, I love being an employee, and it's, maybe I'll start a business once we've had kids one day, but it's definitely not on my radar right now. But having said that, I had been freelancing a lot on the side of my business, mainly because I love design, and with an emphasis on freelancing. So I was,
Yes.
I was just doing a lot of stuff for family and friends just purely because I loved graphic design and it was my hobby as well as my job. So I had been doing a lot of freelancing. I had a little website, and I remember my husband saying to me, you're a designer and your website's a bit rubbish. Shouldn't you do something about that? And I'm like, well, what does it matter? I'm not really trying to run a business here. And he kind of kept niggling at me to do something about it. And eventually I updated my website, made it much nicer. And then all of a sudden, in addition to family and friends asking me to do stuff for them, real businesses were approaching me, asking me to do work and offering me like actual money as opposed to love. And it kind of got to the point where it was either turn away all this business that was coming my way or take a plunge. So, it was literally 2 weeks after I'd had that conversation with my boss, I went back to them and I said, is it okay if I start working 4 days a week? So that I've got 1 day a week to do this other work that's coming in on the side. I had negotiated that with them, and then within a week of negotiating that with them, I had to go back and go, look, I think I have to actually quit. So it was a really weird way it all came about. It was one of those, I knew I'd have a business one day. I didn't intend it to start so quickly, but it did start very quickly, and here I am today, 11 years on, and it's still going. So that's a very brief backstory of the start of the business, I guess.
That's great. And outside of work, so what's something that your friends or family would know about you that the BLG audience wouldn't?
Oh, I did triathlon for 10 years, and I went to 2 Commonwealth Games, and that was representing the country of my birth, which is another thing most people wouldn't realize, is that I was actually born in the small Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago, which is just off the coast of Venezuela. Both my parents are from there, and I was born there and was there till I turned 9, and then we moved to Perth. So there you go. There's something not a lot of people know at all.
No, and what brought them here?
I think the political situation in Trinidad wasn't fantastic. So, they were looking to move, somewhere, and most people in Trinidad would tend to move to Canada, but my dad had kids from a previous marriage and they were living over here. So in the end, Australia won. Yeah. And I can tell you that Perth is basically as far away from Trinidad and Tobago as you can get. So it was literally on the other side of the world that we embarked off to. So yeah, it was interesting.
And it is the most remote capital in the world, they say. Perth?
That's right. Yeah, it's a long way from anywhere, but especially a long way from Trinidad and Tobago and the West Indies.
Yeah, and if we take a step back to that boss, what was the boss's expression, or what did they say when you sort of went from everything's brilliant, no, I'm here, to stay within 2 weeks, departing full time?
Yeah, I don't think they were thrilled. They weren't thrilled because I think a lot of that, I was doing a lot more than they realized as well. So me leaving was quite impactful on their business. That said, I negotiated a situation where I said, look, if you will sublet me an office in the building, so they just sublet me one of the empty offices in the building. It was like a little 3x3 office that I first hung up my shingle at. Then I will stay here. So I'm not taking all, the IP in my head away from you. I'm still here. And then I'm also able to consult back to you or contract back to you as needed. So yeah, in the end, they weren't thrilled about it, but they saw kind of how it all came about. And so they were quite supportive in the end. So it was really nice.
Excellent. And I'm assuming whether they were supportive or not, you were still going to move forward. So they made
That's
the right. Yeah. And, I know that's 11 years ago now, but what were some of the key fears that you had at the time in making that decision?
I think the main fear was that, up until that point in time, so it was myself and my partner. I think we had gotten married by that stage. So we were married, we had a mortgage, and up until that point in time, we had always contributed very equally to any assets that we had. So my main worry was, more ego-based than anything, in that I didn't want my contribution to the household and to the mortgage to be supplemented by my husband. I guess I didn't want to be a kept woman. I wanted to be still equal in all things. So that was really my only worry, because it was one of those relatively risk-free things where I set out on my own, and if I failed miserably, my previous employers would have been like, yes, we will take you back, no worries. And also, if worst came to worst, my husband's income at the time was enough to cover the mortgage. So it was a pretty nice situation. And yeah, really my only fear was I liked contributing equally, to the things that we owned, and I didn't want to back that off. And luckily, within 3 months, I was making the equivalent of my full-time salary again. So it was an unfounded fear in the end. Yeah.
Great. And was there ever a time when you thought, actually, this is not for me, running my own business, and I'll go back and work for someone?
Yeah, like a million times over the years. So many. This is a difficult one because I loved working for myself and I loved having that autonomy, and I especially love the control. I am a little bit of a control freak, or a lot of a control freak. So having that ultimate control over my own destiny really appealed to me. But I guess like most creative people who go out and start their own businesses, I didn't really love the running the business side of things. I didn't love the managing of client expectations and the hiring of staff and then the managing of staff and the accounting and the marketing. I really just wanted to do the creative side of things. And yes, slowly over the years, I got to do less and less of the creative side of stuff, and more my job was just managing people and managing suppliers and managing staff and clients. And yeah, there were very many moments, and eventually it led to a breakdown in the end because it all got too much to me. I have to say, when we had kids, our first child, the business was not set up to operate without me in it. So I had staff who were doing the design work, and they could handle that side of things. But there was still all the administrative stuff and the accounting and the invoicing and the marketing and the lead generation. That was all me. So I couldn't really take a break once we had kids. So yeah, I didn't really have a day off work when our first baby was born. And about 18 months later, it just all got too much. And that's when I had a breakdown.
Oh, look, and thanks for being so vulnerable and sharing that. For people that may be listening to this in a similar position, what's some advice, given your experience, that you could share with people listening today?
Yeah, it's funny because I look back and, while it's easy to say I should have set up the business to run without me in it, I'm not sure I could have at the time, because it was about 4 years old. It was in a really high growth phase at that particular point in time. And yeah, I'm not sure if I could go back in time. I'm not sure what else I could have done, because I was really just trying to keep my head above water. I was bringing people on to help. I was, so I had set it up well enough to operate. So at least I had 2 designers there doing the actual work. I'm not sure what else I could have done. So it's just one of those situations where hindsight's 2020, but even sometimes with hindsight, you go, well, it just is what it is. When a business is high growth and it kind of in startup mode, I guess, there's not a lot you can do other than just do your best and go with it. So I think the one thing that I did that I could have done better was not be perfectionistic in the way I went about things. I really, especially with regard to clients, I tried to mind read, and I always tried to be one step ahead of them, and tried to know what they needed before they even knew they needed it. And I made a lot of assumptions about what people thought, which weren't accurate. So if there's one thing I could not do, if there was one thing I could tell myself not to do, it would be, don't try to be so perfectionistic in all these things. Sometimes people's expectations are not going to be able to be met, and sometimes that's not going to be your fault. And I think that might have helped me avoid the breakdown, because ultimately it was stress-induced that brought that on, and a lot of the stress was caused by my perceived failure to meet client expectations, and that my perception probably wasn't reality.
And after that, did you then come back into the business again, or what happened post that traumatic moment in your life?
Yeah, so I had the breakdown, and it coincided with my husband, who was a teacher at the time, being on long service leave from teaching. So I had the breakdown, and I was done with the business. I wanted to shut it down, just stop it. And he kind of said, look, it's a good business. It makes money. Why don't you let me run it? And initially I was like, you're not even a designer. How can you run a design business? And no, I can't do that to my clients. And he kind of reminded me, well, you're just going to shut the business down. So I don't know how much you're caring about your clients right now. And I was like, yeah, well, that's a good point. Okay, whatever. I don't care. Just, yeah. So I kind of handed it all over to him. I expected him to just kind of find out after about I gave him about 3 months to figure out that, yeah, I don't want to do this either. It's too hard. And then actually he just turned it all around and, yeah, ran it like a business, which I wasn't. I was probably running it more like a charity. Doing way too much I was over promising and over delivering, Whereas he kind of dialed all that back to, he would make a promise and then he would deliver on the promise rather than trying to just take it everything next level, which is what I was doing. So I think he had been observing me for a lot of years and thinking, if I was Kelly, I'd do this. And if I was Kelly, I'd do that. And obviously making the suggestions to me, but nobody really listens to their partner when they make suggestions. So it was an opportunity for him to kind of implement everything he'd been telling me to do. And of course it all worked. And yeah, so in the end I went, okay, well, great. If you're enjoying running the business, that's fantastic. You continue to run the business and then I get to come back and just be one of the designers in the business. So that was the intent. I kind of came back to be one of the designers in the business. Then we had our second child. And it was fantastic because I got to have time off when she was born and really enjoy having that time with her. And then again, I've come back into the business in various roles over the years. I've stepped in and out depending on a few things that I've been doing professionally. But currently at the moment, I've stepped back in a more back of house kind of role. So I leave him to do the front of house stuff and I do the, content marketing and lead generation and a bit of financial control type stuff.
Great. And if you do fast forward, so the next section is the build section, which you've led in beautifully. When you walk into a networking event or you get a new client and someone asks you, what does Swish Design do? How do you respond?
Yeah, we're pretty lucky in that most people know what web and graphic design are. So I do generally, we have got a tagline, which is we help businesses tell their stories better. But that means that's intriguing to people, but they're like, well, what does that even mean? So yeah, we're website and graphic designers who help people tell their business stories better because I guess a lot of web developers don't really have that strong design background and a lot of designers don't have the strong web development background, and we kind of legitimately combine both. So, and we kind of bring a marketing brain to everything that we do as well. So we don't just design in isolation. Like we don't just take a brief and someone goes, oh, here's my copy, here's the picture, just make them look good. Like we can do that, but we tend to go take the next step and go, oh, okay, hang on a second. What does this piece need to do for you? Who are you trying to attract? What's the call to action? What do you want people to do when they've seen this piece of marketing material? And yeah, we tend to take that extra step with everything, with websites, with any branding design we do. We try to bring the marketing side into it as well, not just the straight up design and functionality side of things.
Great. And, I'm sure there's lots of people out there either just about to leave corporate or have left corporate and looking at their website and just thinking, actually, that's not very good. Like you, your husband, Anthony, mentioned at the start of this podcast. What are sort of 3 key tips you'd give a business owner listening to this where they think their website isn't quite up to scratch? What are 3 key things that you would give them advice on?
Insofar as the design, I think the first thing a website needs to do, it has to support your brand. And a lot of people don't understand brand and branding. And so I guess branding is what people say about you, or brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So what I generally say to people is, if you've done a good job for someone and they're talking to their friend and they've said, oh, Paul's this great guy who does X, Y, and Z, that person is going to go straight to your website, and your website needs to support that Paul does X, Y, and Z. And if it doesn't, there's a disconnect there and it's very jarring for the person. So I guess a case in point is like we finished building a house last year, and our builder, he was fantastic. He builds bespoke houses. He doesn't build kind of, the 3-unit developments and stuff like that. Like he builds architecturally designed houses. He did a great job for us. When people ask us who built your house, we tell them, but knowing full well that when they go to his website, it's this dodgy front page. It's just a 1-page site. All the branding on the site indicates that he builds like old-fashioned Federation style homes. And so there's a real disconnect there. And I've said to him any number of times, your website is letting you down because it's not supporting what people like me are saying about you. So I know that's not three things, but it's kind of one very major thing. Like your website must support what the people who are recommending you to others are saying about you. And if it's not doing that, it's not doing a good job for you, because they're the very best recommendations, those ones that come from other people. And if you've got this warm lead coming to your website and then all of a sudden your website makes them go cold, that's just a crying shame.
And why do you think people don't make that change? Because, you're an expert, obviously built a good relationship with the builder. Why do you think they're so resistant, or he or she is so resistant in making that change?
It's usually because they've got work coming in. The main reason people won't build a new website is because it costs quite a lot of money. It's not a small investment as a general rule. Like a decent website is going to start around 8 to 10 grand. To get it a properly done one. And people, a lot of time they're like, but I've got more work than I can handle. Why would I get a website? And generally I say to them, but is the work that you're getting the work that you want? Or is it just work? Because that's the other thing, is a website if a website that's beautifully done and matches your brand, it's going to bring you more of the work that you want and allow you to say no to the work that you don't want. So a lot of the people, our landscaper was the same thing. He was like, I'm so busy. Why do I need a website? And I'm like, well, are you busy doing stuff you love doing, or are you busy just doing the stuff that comes your way? And he was, yes, the stuff that comes my way. But it's hard to shift people away from that, because if they've got more work than they can handle as a rule, they're not really stopping to think, well, is this really the work I want to be doing? There's a lot of fear tied up in that. No one wants to knock back work. They can't get their head around that. But, if you're knocking back work that you don't want in aid of getting work that you do want, to me, that's a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, and it's that nicely leads on to the next question, is around your ideal client. So who's your ideal client to work with?
Our ideal client is a well-established business owner. So they've been around for 5 to 10 years. 9 times out of 10, they've tried to do their website themselves, or they've done their website with someone like a freelancer and not had a great experience. And they understand the value of the investment. So it is an investment. I'm not going to lie. You're spending a great deal of money on the website. So you need to deliver on that investment. And an ROI on a website can sometimes be hard to measure, or, it can sometimes take a year to be seen. But it's, sometimes, and the way that I generally sell it to people is that, again, in the case of our builder, I'll say to him, a website might cost you 10 grand. What is one extra house a year worth to you? And it's worth 100 grand. So it's a very easy investment to make. So I generally say to people, our ideal client is that person where the cost of where one client is worth, $20,000 to $30,000 to them plus in a lifetime. So it might be a bookkeeper who, for each client they get on, that client stays with them for 3 to 5 years and is worth, $20,000 to $30,000 in that 3 to 5 years. If we build them a $8,000 to $10,000 website, that's a really worthwhile investment. If they just have to get one extra client and they've paid for the website effectively. So that's kind of our ideal client. They sit in that area.
Yeah, and look, I think it's a great point. Like, I worked in one of the biggest brands in the world, being Coca-Cola, for most of my career. And people used to say, you don't need to promote Coke. And why don't you just turn off the budget? But they used to, roughly spend between between 10 and sort of $20 billion a year on marketing. And they continued to do it, even though the brand was 150 plus years old.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's not always a direct correlation and ROI. And I think some of the data analytics, some of the stuff that happens these days is brilliant, but a brand is a brand. And I think people do get mixed up on the message and that the brand that goes on for a long time versus the immediate ROI. But I love the way that you phrased both of those points, especially the work that you want. I've never heard anyone articulate it that way before. And I'm sure for listeners, it really jumped and struck an accord with them. As far as some of the challenges that you and Anthony face today in running your agency, what are some of the key challenges that you face today?
I think the biggest challenge is the fact that for a business to have real value, it needs some kind of recurring income stream. And what we're finding is in the web and graphic design world, the graphic design element used to be the recurring income stream. It used to be that you had any number of clients and they put regular graphic design work through you, and that was really your bread and butter stuff. And then the web design was like a bit of the icing on the cake. Mixing my food metaphors there, but it works. What we're finding now is that in industry wide, that recurring graphic design work has really significantly dropped off, which means that more of the income, you need to make more of your income from web design work. Unfortunately, web design work tends to be, you get that one job and it's a new sale every single time. People are not buying websites every 2 months from you. So that's a real challenge, is going, okay, well, where do you get that recurring income stream? So a lot of web design companies, they do ongoing maintenance packages, and they actually make that a compulsory part of doing a web design for you. It's a point of difference for us that we don't lock people into stuff like that when we do a design for them, but it just means that we need to find a recurring income stream from somewhere else. But this is I guess this is the biggest lesson I've learned about business in general, is that I think when we get into business, a lot of people, we get into it thinking, okay, if I work really hard for 5 to 6 years, I'll get my business into a point where it's just ticking along and it's almost set and forget. And what I've learned in 11 years of owning a business is that there's no set and forget. There's very rare business where you actually get to do that. The market's constantly changing. The world is changing at such a pace. Well-established industries are being wiped out by apps, and things like Uber are just coming in and completely disrupting everything. So you just can't take anything for granted. You have to be on your feet. You have to be thinking ahead all the time. And sometimes that's fun, and sometimes it's tiring to have to be always, you can't ever sit on your laurels and go, oh, things are going swimmingly at the moment. This will be like this forever. It's not going to be like that forever. And you've got to be on the lookout for what's the next thing, or what's the next thing that's going to disrupt your industry, and try to be one step ahead of that at all times.
Yeah, and I heard a great podcast today on Google, where actually Google, they said, went to sleep at the wheel a little with, driverless cars and other things, and it allowed Facebook to take a lot of the revenue off them. So, now they're back focusing to really drive the core. So it doesn't. I don't think it really matters what business you're in these days. Even if a Google can get caught sleeping at the wheel, pardon the pun, I think your point is spot on. You've got to look for it, and I think it's about making proactive change rather than sitting there and sort of saying, well, hang on, it's unfair that someone in Ukraine is willing to do some design at $10 an hour. That's just going to happen. That's the world we live in. So what can you do differently? And as you said, what can you stay ahead of the pack to get that recurring income up? So look, some great points there. And I know you've mentioned Anthony a couple of times, where he seems to have two, especially, on this podcast, two really pivotal moments that he's given you some great advice. What would you like to say to Anthony for the support that he's given you through this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very, very lucky to, so first of all, like when I first kind of floated the idea of like, I think I need to quit my job and start this business. And I think he had like a bit of a moment of like, oh my God, okay. But, we were very open with each other, and, so he said, okay, well, let's do this. We know that my salary can cover the mortgage while, if things completely go pear-shaped, we know that you will probably be, welcome back with open arms to your employer if everything does go pear-shaped. So let's do it. And yeah, he's just been very supportive, and he's been particularly supportive in the fact that he watched me making mistake after mistake after mistake and not taking on board the advice he was giving. and just being very patient in going, well, okay, this is Kelly. She has to make her own mistakes before she she has to make mistakes for herself. She can't just take people at their word. So he was quite patient in dealing with that, and then certainly in swooping in and taking over the business when it needed someone to do that was quite handy. And then also just sticking. I mean, he enjoys it. He enjoys the challenge of it. So I'd say I'd thank him for sticking around and keeping the business going. But that's very much his own thing. He's loved it. He loves the challenge. He's a very processes and systems oriented person. So he's loved kind of getting in, getting deep in the weeds and making things run more smoothly. And certainly, yeah, he's done a heap of work making our business viable. We had no remote staff 3 years ago. And it was kind of killing us a little bit because we had a very much a fixed ceiling on what we could make with, straight Australia, with only Australian staff in the office. And he brought in a remote team to support our Australian team, and that made the business more viable, reduced the stress in the office for everybody who was in there. And he's just continually improving things. And we're very lucky. I'm very lucky as well.
Well, the next section is the live section. And what are some of the daily habits that you do to balance your career? Because I know that you spend some time in Swish Design. I know that you're doing a couple of other book projects, etc. How do you sort of manage that? And what are some of the daily habits that you have to make that manageable?
Yeah, the main daily habits, and they're going to sound like, a little bit lame, but a lot of people don't do them, is, daily exercise. I exercise every day. I really prioritize good sleep. And I know for many business owners, sleep is a very easy thing to sacrifice when you're under the pump and you just think, I can get by on 5 hours sleep. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stay up late and finish this thing. I'm going to wake up early and do this thing then. And it's so counterproductive sacrificing sleep. In the end, it always gets you. So I really prioritize getting good sleep. I prioritize that daily exercise. I prioritize good nutrition. They all help to keep stress levels under control. And the other thing that I prioritize is what I call having white space in my days, because this is another thing. I've certainly in the past been guilty of like scheduling every single minute of the day down to the minute to try and get through everything. And again, that's counterproductive because it only takes one tiny thing to throw that all out of whack, and then it sends your stress levels soaring and you can't really recover from it. And stress ongoing over a long period of time is not great. So now, I've learned to build what I call white space into my days, which are just little pockets here and there where I get to move a bit more slowly and a bit more mindfully and meditatively even. And I just find that those little pockets in the day are just little stress relievers and little breathers that allow me to, the points of my day where I have to go and go hard, I can, because I've got these pockets of time either side where I can go slow.
And the next section's the give section. So what's a cause or causes that you're passionate about and why?
So I've got two that we contribute to. So one is called Foundation 18, and it's a charity started by Kate Bolt. Kate is one of these just naturally humanitarian people, and someone said to her once, don't go to Indonesia because if you go to Indonesia, you're going to start an orphanage. She went to Indonesia, and sure enough, like what she saw of them made her, it moved her quite deeply, and she started an orphanage, and it's called Foundation 18, and it looks after Indonesian children who have lost their parents or have lost their carers, their main carers. It's very much funded by Kate, and she does a lot of stuff. She sells buttons and pillows and all kinds of things to try and fund this. So we contribute monthly to that foundation. And the other one is quite difficult to say. It's Rafiki Mwema, MWEMA. And that is a Kenyan charity that looks after children who have been sexually abused. So we contribute financially to that one as well. And obviously we're both, Anthony and I, parents. We adore our kids. It really kills us a little bit that there are kids in this world who either don't have parents or who have been abused by the adults in their life. So that's why we're kind of drawn to those two charities in particular. And those two charities I have personal connections to both of them. I know the people that run them. So I find it easier to support those kind of charities than the big ones where I'm not entirely sure where the money's going.
Excellent. Well, the last section is the action section, and this is where we can just get some really practical advice from you. So the first question is, what's your number one personal productivity tip?
Yeah, you're just asking me for one productivity tip, Paul.
Well, you can give more than one.
30. I think if I had to just give one, I would say aim to do the least you can do rather than the most you can do. I guess the idea I got from this, you mentioned I'm doing some book projects at the moment, and one of those book projects is with James Schramko. So I'm helping him write his first book, and through that book, I came across this 64-4 rule. So we all know the 80-20 rule, which is 80% of outputs come from 20% of inputs. So if you 80-20, the 80-20, you'll find out that 64% of outcomes come from 4% of actions. So if you can figure out what those 4% actions are in your business, you can focus on doing those. When you're trying to prioritize the 50 tasks that you've got on your to-do list, look over that to-do list and go, which are the 4% actions on this to-do list? You do those ones first, and then everything else, if they have to wait, it's not going to affect your business as much as those ones. The problem with the 4% actions is they're generally the painful ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think of things like when Ant has to write a web design scope. So we've just had a web design meeting with someone. He has to write the web design scope. Like, that's a 4 to 6 hour job. It's quite painful and easy to put off. But that is an example of a 4%, easily 64% of our income will come from the 4% of time we spend doing those web design scopes. So you just have to kind of suck it up sometimes and do those, because they're not the glamour jobs, but they're the ones that bring the money in.
Yeah, and a quick shout out to James as well. I was in James's Silver Circle for some time, and it's still in super fast business. And I've learned a lot from James. So quick shout out to James, and I can't wait for him to release his book, especially now I know you're doing the editing. So
it's going to be good. I can confidently say that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Next is around apps. So either on your smartphone, a smart device, or on your laptop, etc. What are some of the apps that you use on a day-to-day basis to help you be productive?
Yeah, look, my favorite app is called Pen and Paper, and it's literally pen and paper. It's not an app. I'm just one of those people that I just need to have written it down for whatever reason. I don't love things telling me things electronically, so I do rely on pen and paper a lot. Having said that, I do love the Insight Timer app for meditation. That just, it's a daily practice meditation, and it really, a lot of people think meditation is you're looking for kind of this beautiful feeling while you're meditating, and that beautiful feeling carries throughout the day. And meditation doesn't work like that. Meditation is more, it just kind of builds over time and does bring calm to your days, but not so much in the moment. It's not like this big transcendental moment every time you meditate. But I do love the Insight Timer app. It's a free app. And I love Evernote for just idea dumps. I'm a writer as well as a business owner. So Evernote is where I love the fact that no matter where I am, I don't have to go scrambling for a piece of paper. I just get into Evernote and record my ideas there.
And look, Kelly, just to build on your point about pen and paper, I must admit, I am very much a technology guy. I'm always at the absolute cutting edge, but I love to write. I used to have bits of paper everywhere. So I've actually now gone to just a pen from Donut, and it basically allows me to write on my iPad.
Yeah.
So I just write, and it's no different to me really writing on a bit of paper. But then I can share that, put it into Evernote. I can put it in other platforms. And I found that as a nice in-between, because I just always had paper everywhere, and I never had the paper that I wanted at the right time. So
perfect. Yeah, it does sound like a nice, in between the two, between analog and digital, for sure.
Yeah. So listeners can try that. And the last question in this action section is around podcasts and books. So I know you've got a couple of podcasts yourself. I believe Straight and Curly and Let It Be, Less Doing, More.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So we'll definitely have the links to those two.
Great.
And obviously there's the Build, Live, Give podcast, so we won't mention that in your favourites. But what other books or podcasts do you love to listen to, and why?
I'll go podcast because there's just too many books and I couldn't even begin to name one. But for business, I do love James's podcast. James Schramko's Super Fast Business podcast at the moment. I like James' philosophies. I like his philosophies around working less, not more, working more efficiently, being more personally effective, as opposed to, doing everything under the sun. So I like that message, and that comes through in his podcast episodes. Being a writer, I love great storytelling, and for great storytelling, you just cannot go past Serial seasons 1 and 3. Season 2, I was a bit meh about. And yeah, just for personal interest, I love Scott Barry Kaufman's psychology podcast. It's just, I love finding out how the brain works, and he does some great interviews. So they're my personal favorite.
And sorry, what was that last one? It was
it's called the Psychology Podcast with Scott Barry Kaufman.
Great. Excellent. And you've had a wonderful 11 years running your business. We really appreciate you being open and honest about the fact that it wasn't always roses, and you with your partner have sort of turned that around. What's some advice or some parting advice you'd love to give the BLG audience based on all your experience to date?
My one biggest piece of advice, because this is the one thing I wish I had done at the start, is just be really careful how you differentiate yourself. So I differentiated myself from other graphic designers by being the most responsive graphic designer on earth. I made myself freely available. I had no boundaries. It was like, you want to email me on the weekends, you want to call me at night, late at night, I will respond to you, no matter what. So there was no boundaries. And I differentiated myself by over-promising and over-delivering. And it's just not sustainable to do that. And not only is it not sustainable, it's not replicable. So it means that you can never hire someone else to help you, because that person can't replicate the level at which you're operating. So if there's one piece of advice, it would be to always operate at a level that is replicable by someone else that you can train.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think when I consult with a lot of people, I say, what's the number one thing that's going to stop you growing this business? And they'll mention all these factors, and I'll say, no, actually the number one thing is you.
Is me. Yeah, that's it.
You're the person that's going to most impact your growth. And I think, it's been brilliant you sharing your journey of, full circle is the way that I look at it.
Yeah.
You were so involved in it. It was all about you. Now you've let your husband run it. You're in the background, plus you're doing a lot of other great projects. So I think that's great inspiration for other people that are struggling to scale outside of themselves.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Well, awesome to have you on the podcast, Kelly. We wish you all the best in the future, and we can't wait to see that book out that you're co-authoring or editing, I should say. And also we'll have all the links to to your podcast and other things that you've mentioned on here in the show notes. So once again, thanks for coming on board.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Build, Live, Give show. If you found this show helpful, please share it with others so we can build businesses, live great lives, and give back to the community. If you would like to join the BLG community, go to our website, www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.